This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. It's a part of our shared culture, and author Sheryl Kaskowitz tells us how God Bless America became such a powerful symbol. Regular contributor Fred Rotondaro says we're at a tipping point in America's understanding of the corporate war against working people. And Bill Press interviews Congressman Chris Van Hollen on the new budget deal. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Author Sheryl Kaskowitz takes a historical and cultural look at how God Bless America became popular and came to serve political purposes. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Sheryl Kaskowitz is a scholar of American music who has most recently served as a lecturer in American Studies at Brandeis University. She earned her Ph.D. in music from Harvard University and a B.A. from Oberlin College, where she also trained as a singer. Her book, God Bless America, traces the history and uses of the patriotic song, its origin, and the politics behind it. Sheryl Kaskowitz, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's nice to talk to you. You know, at one point in your book about the history of God Bless America, you say, love it or hate it, the song has a hold on America's consciousness. Why is this?
Well, I think, for starters, it's one of only a few songs that most Americans know and can sing together. We could probably come up with a relatively short list of other songs that are truly shared across mainstream American culture. I think for most of us, it's hard to remember where you learned it. It's kind of part of it is it's almost become a folk song in a way, though it has different associations, I think, for many people than that term folk song. But it's just a part of our shared culture is one thing. And the other that I think is interesting about God Bless America in particular is that its lyrics are so vague. If you think about them, we all might have specific associations and meanings with them. But if you really look at the lyrics, they ask for guidance, but not in a particular direction. And this question of land that I love really could mean different things depending on who is doing the singing. And so over time, since the song's debut in 1938, the meanings surrounding it and the associations surrounding it have shifted depending on the context in which it was sung, who is doing the singing. And for me, anyway, looking back at its history, it's gathered this wide array of meanings and associations so that it's become this very powerful symbol that can be used in different ways. So I think that's what I meant about it entering into America's consciousness, especially looking over its history.
It's interesting. I've never given it that much thought. It's always been a part of my life. And I'm sitting here as you're answering, and I'm thinking, where did I first learn this song? It had to be grade school. It had to be part of a history class, perhaps. I don't recall, but it's interesting. And it'll be interesting as we continue the conversation to learn more about it. And in fact, you also point out that a song that was meant to unify the country actually was marked by discord almost from the beginning. How so?
Sure. Well, so the song premiered in 1938. Irving Berlin wrote it, and not everyone knows that, but he originally wrote it in 1918, and then decided not to use it. He wrote it for a musical called Yip Yip Yaphank, which was meant for a soldier review during World War II. And anyway, he decided not to use it. He put it aside. Kate Smith approached him in 1938. Kate Smith was a radio star at the time. For those who might not know about her, this was sort of the peak of both of their careers, actually, right around this period. And as soon as, and Irving Berlin brought out his old song and gave it to her, and she premiered it on her radio show on Armistice Day in 1938. And right from the beginning, what had this sort of charged, behind-the-scenes struggle for control between Irving Berlin and Kate Smith, and it was really played out between Irving Berlin and Kate Smith's manager, who was named Ted Collins. And what I found in my research is there were these dueling press releases. So Collins would do interviews that said that Irving Berlin had written the song exclusively for Kate Smith, and then Irving Berlin would counter with the original story behind the song, that he wrote it in 1918, but that Kate Smith premiered it. There were arguments about why it was that it became popular, because it really was embraced as an alternate anthem right from the beginning by many people. Mm-hmm. And so there were stories that said that it was because of Kate Smith's performances, and Irving Berlin would argue that it was something inherent in the song itself. There was a behind-the-scenes conflict about restricting performances to Kate Smith, which is what they had all agreed to at the beginning, really to try to protect the song from becoming a pop hit. They talked about that specifically to try to give it a bigger legacy, to limit its performances so that it wasn't everywhere at the time.
So they were really engineering where and how this song would be played right from the start.
Yes, there was a lot of thinking, and I think that there was a sense that it really was going to have this life of its own, and that it was a different kind of song than other songs that Irving Berlin was writing at that time. They disagreed about, Irving Berlin had decided he was going to donate the royalties to the song. There were disagreements about how that should be announced, and he ultimately waited 2 years till 1940 to make the announcement that all of the royalties from God Bless America were going to the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And that's still true, actually. There's a God Bless America Foundation, the God Bless America Fund, through which all of the royalties still go to the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts now of the greater New York area, not the national organization.
Wow, very interesting. We're speaking with Sheryl Kaskowitz, a scholar of American music. Her book, God Bless America, the surprising history of an iconic song, which traces the history and uses of the patriotic song, its origin, and the politics behind it. So Irving Berlin writes it in 1918. Kate Smith makes it popular some 20 years later. Gets adopted by the right wing during the Vietnam War. How did the song get to be associated with 9/11?
Right. Well, it started with a press conference on 9/11 on the steps of the Capitol, where members of Congress gathered. There were speeches about unity and mourning for the victims and remembrance, and showing strength. And then there was a moment of silence. And after the press conference officially ended, those gathered spontaneously, it seems to me, began to sing "God Bless America." And it was at this very poignant moment where, especially for those who were used to the song being used in more calculated political ways, mm-hmm. that it really was a response, a sincere response to the attacks. And it was after that point that the song sort of became this symbol and the song of choice, really, for the period right after the attacks. It was the right blend of patriotism mixed with emotion and prayer that many people seem to be looking for right at that moment. And so after that is when it became a part of other kinds of rituals that were marking 9/11. That's when it was added to baseball games, for example. It was sung at the first bell at the New York Stock Exchange, at Broadway shows. It was, it really became a part of the public response to the attacks.
You know, do you find it a little odd that a show tune written by an immigrant Jew became a virtual religious hymn? You tell us about Berlin's reactions to the popularity of his song. You touched on it a little bit before when we talked about his writing of it.
Yeah, well, Berlin always talked about the song as a love ballad to his adopted country. He came to the U.S. as a child from Russia. And there is a recording of him singing the song where this sincerity really comes through. It was a song, you know, he was able to become successful in a way that, you know, never would have happened. And it's interesting because at the time, the fact that he was a Jewish immigrant, he was a very prominent celebrity. And so that was definitely a part of the meaning of the song, and it was sung at events like the National Conference for Christians and Jews, which was promoting religious tolerance, and again, this was also in the backdrop was increasing Nazi violence. Kristallnacht, the attacks on Jewish communities in Europe, actually happened the day before the song debuted in November 1938, and so this hymn, as you say, I think today we might think of it because of the way it's been used by the Christian right. We might think of it as tied to Christianity, and again, different people have different connections with the song, but at the time, it really had this other meaning. And on the flip side, there was a anti-Semitic backlash against the song. It was boycotted by the Ku Klux Klan and domestic Nazi groups. They wrote screeds against it as, imagining this Jewish conspiracy for control of the song. And so looking back at its history, I find it really fascinating how it's shifted. Obviously it's invoking God, but it meant something a little bit different than it might mean to people today.
Again, we're speaking with Sheryl Kaskowitz, scholar of American music, author of God Bless America. We had Pete Seeger as a guest on this netcast, and he reminded us that Woody Guthrie wrote a protest response to God Bless America a year after Kate Smith's recording of it. What was that song?
Right, that's right. So that song was originally called God Blessed America for Me, and Guthrie later changed the refrain to This Land Was Made for You and Me. So it was this land was your land, one of as a response to what he saw as a sort of knee-jerk jingoism in God Bless America. He really did not like it.
Funny stuff. And it's amazing because, now I think back, I probably learned both of those songs side by side as a kid. That's kind of the funny thing. Yes, I agree. Both of them, I think, have entered this place of, being disconnected from meanings that they might have had earlier and taking on new ones. But yes, at the time, they were definitely dueling anthems, I think you can think about them. Sheryl Kaskowitz, again, the author of God Bless America, The Surprising History of an Iconic Song, which traces the history and uses of the patriotic song, its origin, and the politics behind it. Sheryl, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back and talking with you again soon. Thank you. Thanks. It was my pleasure. Indeed. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Fred Rotondaro of the Center for American Progress lays it on the line. No federal minimum wage hike until Democrats win a majority in Congress. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
The scandalous saga of the Wall Street bailout continues, for bank regulators are now watering down Congress's pathetically weak reforms. However, during the past 4 years, one fellow has shown some regulatory backbone, proposing rules to prevent a repeat of the whole sorry saga. He is Gary Gensler, head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and he's dared to push the Treasury Secretary and other major bank overseers to join him in seriously limiting Wall Street's cavalier proliferation of complex derivatives. Analysts describe these convoluted schemes as poorly disclosed, poorly understood, and could lay waste to the economy. Good for Gensler, right? Yes, but of all the agency heads who are involved in writing new banking rules, guess which one was not invited this year by President Obama to stay on the job? Yes, the tough one, the one actually trying to protect the people, the one not afraid to offend Wall Street greedheads, Gary Gensler. He's being replaced by Timothy Massad, who appears to be more of an industry lapdog than a watchdog. Massad, a career insider, has been a corporate lawyer for banks, a lickspittle lieutenant for Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, himself an infamous Wall Street softy, and a blocker of tough provisions to stop big banks from unfairly squeezing hard-hit homeowners. Apparently, Gensler wanted to keep doing his work at this once obscure agency, staying on guard against financial connivers trying to twist the rules to legalize banker robbery. But Wall Streeters certainly didn't want him there, and Obama bowed to them, displacing the one guy, the one regulatory chief, who had the guts and gumption to stand up to coddle bankers. This is Jim Hightower saying, not only is Gensler gone, but Wall Street now gets a regulator who's being entrusted to return the agency to obscurity. What a disgrace!
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Regular contributor Fred Rotondaro gives us the lowdown on the takeover of American politics by corporate interests and their war on both politics and morality. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, regular commentator Fred Rotondaro, not only a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a contributor to the Huffington Post, as well as americasdemocrats.org, he is also active in the lay Catholic community, especially on social issues. Fred Rotondaro, thank you so much for joining us, as always, on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you, Jim.
Are you encouraged that we're near a tipping point in Americans' understanding of the corporate war on workers?
Yeah, I really am. I think the corporate war has gone on so long. It's really been about a 30-year-plus war. This goes back to 1977, 1978. But the corporate war has gone on so long and has become so extreme that people are finally waking up to what's happening to them. And what is happening is you have a virtual corporate takeover of American politics. And that corporate takeover means that policies are made that reward corporations, that help CEOs, but that de facto hurt the American worker very, very strongly.
Are the protests that we see at Walmart for a living wage going to have any real effect, since it's the favorite store of so many Americans, including those who don't make a living wage?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the recent fundraising effort in a couple of Walmart stores to raise money for holiday food for Walmart workers is, it's almost like a satire out of Saturday Night Live. This is absolutely insane. The current wage is minimum wage is $7.25. That is per inflation the lowest it's been in something like 60 years. Take the Walmart family. There are 8, 9, 10 members of the family who have the majority of the money. Those members of the family control about $142 billion. Very, very importantly, that $142 billion is more than the net worth of the bottom 40% of the American population. And yet, the Walmart family has public policies that are enacted to help them even more. The economic writer for New Yorker, John Cassidy, is a very, very astute person. And he did a column not too long ago, sometime toward the end of 2013, talking about the causes of inequality. And the first two causes are the causes everybody points out. And he says that those causes are technology and globalization. But the other causes are all causes that are engineered by corporate leaders or by the government. Those causes are the attempts to weaken worker protection. Workers in about 11 or 12 states now have no protection for sick leave. He cited also government policies that hurt unions. Unions now represent over 7 or 8%, only 7 or 8% of the American worker. And finally, he cited the, as he put it, the CEO corporate compensation mentality, by which he basically meant CEOs get paid in the millions, in the tens of millions, and nobody feels the need to pay the worker even a living wage. Those things are leading enough people in this country to the point where they say, enough is enough, we've got to change this.
The state of Washington has been very progressive on this, and I think at this point, if I remember correctly, they have the highest minimum wage. They voted to go above the federal minimum wage. Washington, D.C. has recently voted to do something similar. Maryland has recently voted to do something similar. What do you see happening on the minimum wage, both at the congressional level and in state houses around the country, now that we're starting to see more of these states start to just kind of take it on their own?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more raising of the minimum wage at the state level. I don't think you're going to see very much happening in Congress until you get a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives.
Nothing happening in Congress?
Yeah,
how could that be?
I really just don't see it. I see John Boehner, who I think is probably the House Speaker with the least substance virtually in my lifetime. And to a large degree, he just doesn't want to do anything along these lines for a couple of reasons. Reason number one is the Tea Party to his right, and reason number two is the corporate America, which is throwing money, tons of money, at Boehner, at Mitch McConnell, to try to keep worker salaries as low as possible. I see now where the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is already starting to bombard Kentucky with money to keep Mitch McConnell in office. I don't see the minimum wage being raised in the United States at the congressional level until after the Republicans lose control of Congress. And don't forget, when you think $7.25, multiply that by 40 hours, you're talking about $280 a week. You're talking about $15,000 a year. These minimum wage workers, if they were married, if you had two people living on $15,000 a year, you're in poverty. If you had a family of four, you're virtually in deep poverty, and yet you're working full time.
Well, and there's something that we get from those on the extreme right, Tea Party in particular. They always talk about how, people on welfare, they need to get up and go get a job. Well, some of these people that are on welfare have two jobs. They've got two jobs, and they still need
true.
welfare. They still need food stamps because they do have a family. This just doesn't make any sense. And why it does not follow inflation, the minimum wage I'm speaking about, it's absolutely nonsensical.
Jim, you've summed it up. I mean, there's very little to say besides what you do say, except it is part of the corporate political mentality that says that says, I got mine, you're not going to get yours. There's a wonderful book on this. It came out a bunch of years ago. It's by a couple of social scientists, one at Harvard, one at Yale, and it's called Winner Take All Politics. Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson point out the amount of income that has gone over the course of 30 years to the upper class. The top percent in America, the top 1 or 2%, has seen their income increase from 1979 up to about 2006 by about 270%. The bottom 20% and the middle class has seen their income increase by a total of 10 to 20% over a 30-year period. That's not 10 to 20% a year. That's over a 30-year period. That's less than 1% a year. Mm. And it is part of this mentality that basically says we are going to take as much as we possibly can, and then they turn around, they contribute vast amounts of money to the Republican Party. For a period of time, they were doing the same to the Democratic Party. Now they're withdrawing a lot of that money because the Democrats are fighting back. People like Bernie Sanders, in Vermont, and Sherrod Brown in Ohio, a couple of very strong senators, are pointing out how this money buys votes in the Senate. A couple of new books have just come out in the not-too-distant past, and they deal with a fascinating concept, and that is how the rich utilize their charitable giving to establish themselves as, look what wonderful people we are. Look how much money we are giving to charities, to the Catholic Church, to this religion or that religion. But basically what they're doing is they're giving an amount of money to buy respectability, and then they go ahead and implement policies that hurt the working man, that hurt the working woman.
We're speaking with Fred Rotondaro, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, regular contributor here on americasdemocrats.org, and, of course, contributor to the Huffington Post as well. As chairman of Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, do you think the Pope's critique of trickle-down economics and economic inequalities will make a difference to Republicans in Congress?
I think it will make a difference, not because they're going to listen to the Pope, but because enough people or enough lay Catholics are listening to the Pope, and they're going to start attacking the people who refuse to listen to the Pope. The Pope has been called a Marxist by none other than Rush Limbaugh. I love that coming from Rush Limbaugh. But what Limbaugh and what some other conservative Catholics are doing is doing to the Pope what they've done to any progressive, that is, use a meaningless term. You're a Marxist. You're a socialist. Therefore, we're not going to discuss health care for everyone, because that's a socialist idea. It's a long-time approach that the right wing has used. That is, they won't deal with real problems. What they do is they throw a term out. But now that term has been used against the leader of the Catholic Church, who is really beloved by the vast majority of Catholics. What else the Pope is doing, and I think this is very, very important, Jim, is there was a period of time when the workers of America have had champions. The champions were the labor unions and the Catholic Church. Labor unions, as we both know, have grown very, very weak. Catholic Church in the last 15, 30 years have grown to the point where they're only concerned, or as the Pope put it, obsessed with the issue of sex, abortion, gay marriage. The Catholic Church in America is in a position to mount a drive to remind people that what the Pope is saying is morally defensible, is morally right. It is indefensible for a country as rich as the United States to have the highest rate of infant mortality in the first year of birth. We do. Our healthcare program ranks 37th in the world, and yet we have people earning tens of millions, billions of dollars in the corporate sector, and they're not doing it. They're not doing it because they're so smart. They are doing it because they are buying off politicians who then proceed to give them benefits. The corporate world and the upper 1% get infinitely more benefits from the federal government than the tens of millions of Americans who are living in poverty. Quick anecdote. Last year, according to an article in the Bloomberg News, hardly a left-wing publication, the leading American banks were subsidized via low-interest loans from the Federal Reserve to the tune of $84 billion. Now, Jim, I am not a financial whiz, but if you give me $1 billion and you say you have to pay only 0.5%, I'm going to make some money on that in the course of a year. Mm-hmm. So what this government, and don't forget, we still give $4 billion a year to the energy industry, to the oil industry. We gave $700 billion in direct money to the banks after they virtually blew up the economy. So what we have in this country is corporate America getting all sorts of subsidies, and people like Rush Limbaugh and people like Paul Ryan, who claims he's concerned about the poor, but who a couple of months ago referred to the fact that the poor should really get out of their hammocks and go out and grab the American dream. I was so disgusted by that line. Ryan is the chair of the House Budget Committee. He's got all sorts of staff aid. He's got all sorts of information, and yet he has no better a view of who the poor in this country are than the average guy sitting in a bar listening to Rush Limbaugh saying, "Right on, Rush."
You know, that's the perfect segue to my next question, because you have said that even though his political standing has been impaired, President Obama has a moral necessity, along with moderate Republicans, to act on a reasonable federal budget, to restore food stamp spending, and to act on immigration reform. Realistically, though, what role does morality play in American politics?
Sadly, it plays very, very little role at the moment. But I think that the concept of morality is going to begin to play a larger and a larger role. Reason being that you're having more and more Americans, and Catholic Church is part of this, so are other groups, who are beginning to see that we are indeed our brother's keeper. But also, the Tea Party that, quote, reveres the Constitution, refuses to go back to the simple fact that the Founding Fathers said the first purpose of government was promoting the common good. So that I would say it is immoral for someone like myself, and I'm in a high tax bracket, but it is immoral for someone like myself to get a break from the federal government while we have 22% of American kids living in poverty. It's immoral. Take my money away. You want to call that redistribution? Fine. But the reality is that the money in America has been getting redistributed to the upper class and the corporations for 30, 40, 50 years. Now, on top of the morality article, on top of the morality argument, I think you've also got the fact that we need to build a stronger America. And what we are doing now with right-wing Republicans, with austerity programs, is we're taking away the opportunity for Americans, for American immigrants, for kids, for the kids in poverty. We're taking away the opportunity for them to get better. We're taking away the opportunity for them to climb the ladder. My father came, Jim, from Italy, in the mines at the age of 11, fourth grade education. 2 kids, both went to college. My father was able to leave the mines after he had black lung because of the fact that there was a black lung pension program in the state of Pennsylvania. He was able to support his family. My Uncle Fred graduated from high school, joined the Marines, off to fight in the war in the Pacific, came out, was able to go to college on the GI Bill. Every member of my family, that immigrant family, college is just a certainty for all of us now because the government helped us a little bit when we needed help. We're taking away that help from low-income people, from immigrants, from kids. And in doing that, we do it at our peril because we're going to drive America on a race to the bottom because we want to save $40 billion in food stamps, which, by the way, Jim, over the course of 10 years, we save $40 billion in food stamps, and we're going to give away approximately $38 billion to the oil industry. To me, that is immoral, and I think people are starting to see it.
Okay. Fred Rotondaro, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, contributor to the Huffington Post, and, of course, a regular contributor to americasdemocrats.org. Fred, as always, a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
Jim, thank you very much.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press and his guest, Maryland Congressman Chris Van Hollen.
Good to be here
Chris
with you,
Van Hollen.
Bill. Great to see you back.
Great to see you, Congressman. And boy, I know it's a very, very hectic, busy time for you, so I doubly appreciate your coming in this morning to tell us about it. Because the big news in the Congress is, and you were here last week, and we talked about a possibility of a budget deal. Now we've got one. You're the ranking House Democrat on that committee. What's the good parts of it? What are the bad parts of it?
And there are good parts and bad parts, as you said. This is not the deal any of us would have written by ourselves. I do believe, on balance, it is a very small step forward. Small step, but nevertheless a positive.
Small step,
one.
But
nevertheless a positive
word, huh?
one. So here are the positives. We've been working to try to reduce the very negative impact of these deep across-the-board cuts, which we call the sequester. They've been providing a drag on the economy, and they're eating away at very important investments in education, in science and research, including medical research at places like NIH, law enforcement, and on some of the national security areas. This agreement doesn't totally get rid of the sequester, but it does reduce it, especially with respect to the non-defense side. So if you look at the budget for the coming year, the one we're in now, which is fiscal year 2014 compared to the last year, it will increase non-defense spending, the category of spending for places like NIH and for education, by $22.5 billion. With respect to defense, it will increase it by $2.5 billion compared to what we are now. So proportionally much larger increase on the non-defense side. On the negative side, there's some of the ways we paid for it over a 10-year period that I would have done differently. But I think we did in the end we were in the end able to do it in as equitable manner as possible. In the last 48 hours, dramatic changes were made that allowed me to support this on the margin.
How much deficit reduction is there?
The deficit reduction is about $22 billion, but it is important.
Over 10 years?
At the end of the 10-year period. Yeah. But it is important to understand where that comes from. It doesn't come from any cuts now. In fact, we're increasing spending in the short term significantly. I mean, spending in the short term is increased by $45 billion compared to what it would be under the sequester. The deficit reduction is achieved by saying that 9 and 10 years from now, we will continue in place what we call the mandatory sequester. So right now we have in place a very modest across-the-board cut on Medicare providers, 2%. That's in place today. It's in place next year. What this agreement says is in the year 2022 and 2023, that will be maintained. That saves money, and we actually took some of that money and spent it now to help relieve the sequester, okay, and to help make sure that places like NIH and education are funded better. And then we left some of that for deficit reduction. But it is important to understand that those aren't coming from cuts this year or next year. They're 9 and 10 years from now. And we can then fast forward and invest some of that right now while the economy is still relatively weak.
I was talking to a House Democrat yesterday, surprised that unemployment benefits wasn't included in this package. Why didn't Democrats, and the White House for that matter, insist that unemployment benefits be included in this package?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, and this is the other point I want to make. This is the largest disappointment by far, and it is outrageous that Congress is considering adjourning this year without addressing unemployment compensation, because on December 28th, 3 days after Christmas, over 1 million Americans will totally lose their extended unemployment compensation. That is an outrage. Now, I had pushed to negotiate both unemployment compensation and the SGR, what we call the doc fix, to make sure that physicians who are providing Medicare services get fully reimbursed, because otherwise they'd face a cut. And what was agreed at the end was that neither the doc fix nor unemployment compensation would be included in this agreement. But the ink was barely dry in the House on this agreement that House Republicans decided to put the doc fix into this package. And I will say that does
into the budget
package. And both Paul Ryan and Patty Murray have publicly acknowledged that was not part of this agreement. And it has put this at greater risk. I mean, I am not happy at all about this development. And people are going to have to decide what to do. We had always argued.
Well, who could put it in there if the chairs?
They did it by the rule in the rule committee. So it's not in the four corners of that agreement, but by a rule in the House, they essentially parachuted it in to the agreement. Now, Congressman Levin and
but not the unemployment.
Well, so Sandy Levin and I, Congressman Levin of Michigan, who's been a great leader on UI, he and I went to the House Rules Committee yesterday afternoon and said, if you're going to allow the House to include the doc fix, which we support,
yes,
by God, you should let the House of Representatives at least vote to also include a 3-month extension to unemployment compensation. Let us vote. If Speaker Boehner and Republicans want to vote no, go for it. And we paid for that, just to be clear, by eliminating some of the really excessive ag subsidies, what we call direct payments, which have already agreed to be eliminated
in the
Farm Bill. So Congress has already agreed to eliminate these things. So we said, okay, let's use that savings to make sure that folks won't be out in the cold.
3-month extension.
They said no. It's outrageous, and this will be a big issue on the floor of the House today.
Do you expect most House Democrats to support this deal?
I think it's too early to say. I would have said before this latest development, the answer would be yes.
Okay.
Because I do think most people agree that on the margins, the budget agreement was a step forward. But we're also very disappointed that UI wasn't included. And we always believed that we would pair unemployment compensation issues with the doc fix. And instead, Republicans, as I said, really doing something that was not part of the agreement.
They stabbed you in the back.
This is underhanded. This is underhanded by the House leadership. This is not something that Paul Ryan or Patty Murray negotiate, or any of the budget negotiators.
Who's chair of the Rules Committee?
Well, that's Pete Sessions, but you can be sure that this instruction is coming from higher up. In fact, during the Rules Committee, you could see some of the Republicans getting very uncomfortable about this, because they recognize that they tried to do this maneuver, and some of them understand that 1 million Americans left out in the cold is not a good thing. But apparently, a majority of them don't worry about that, and Speaker Boehner clearly doesn't worry about that, because he did not make our amendment in order. The amendment Sandy Levin and I proposed, we will not get a vote on it. So democracy will not be allowed to work its will to help over 1 million Americans.
Pete Sessions.
It is a shocking development, and as people, families are struggling at the end of this month and into next month, they know who to call. I mean, Speaker Boehner, let us have a vote to help these Americans.
Pete Sessions would not have ruled this way without John Boehner and Eric Cantor either saying okay or telling him to do it?
Well, absolutely. In fact, the chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Sessions, left the Rules Committee meeting, and when he came back, he said he had gone down to talk to the Speaker of the House about this issue, because clearly they were uncomfortable with this development. But the verdict from the Speaker was there's going to be no vote to make sure these Americans receive continued unemployment compensation. And remember, these are people who lost their jobs through no fault of their own and are looking every day. I mean, we heard very powerful testimony from some of these individuals just a few weeks ago.
The inside story on the budget deal from a man inside the room, Congressman Chris Van Hollen. Bob Cusack from the Hill here as a friend. The bill doesn't get any better than this. If you want to join the conversation, your questions, your comments. It's outrageous, that story on the unemployment benefit. 866-55-PRESS. We'll be right back.
This is the Bill Press Show.
12 minutes now before the top of the hour. The big it was just revealed the day before yesterday, but the big showdown on the budget deal comes, was it revealed yesterday or the day before, right? Tuesday.
It was announced.
The other night.
Yeah. Announced Tuesday evening.
That's right.
But the vote is today in the House.
That's right.
Congressman Chris Van Hollen here with us. Ranking Democrat on the House Budget Committee, Bob Cusack, managing editor of The Hill. Where do we go from here, Bob?
Well, I think that the big issue is going back to unemployment insurance. We actually get calls, everyday Americans, asking about unemployment insurance. They want to know if their benefits are going to continue. Where does it go from here? Because this deal doesn't have it. I think it's going to be approved. As we talked about, there'll be defections on both the right and the left. But what happens? What Harry Reid indicating he's going to address it at the beginning of next year, possibly to make it retroactive. Is there going to be a major push to do that come January?
Yes, and I got to say, Bob, I did see those comments by Leader Reid, and I'm glad that he wants to address it first thing. But I got to emphasize, this is something that we should do before we leave, because we should do it now, and we will continue to push in the House. I know the Speaker said no, but we will object to adjourning the House, and we will object to going home. Now, if a majority of Republicans vote to go home and leave over 1 million Americans in the cold, they obviously can do that at the end of the day.
Well, Democrats refuse to go home?
We will refuse to. We don't want to go home. We're going to vote against adjournment. We're going to say stay here, get the work done on UI. Because it's unconscionable that Congress would go home, pack its bags and go home, leaving 1.3 million Americans out in the cold. And I should emphasize that in addition to hurting these struggling families, you actually hurt the economy, because it means they don't have money to pay the rent, go buy food at the local grocery store. And the Congressional Budget Office says the impact is 200,000 fewer jobs in the country. Not fewer jobs for the folks who are unemployed, fewer jobs in the surrounding communities because of the reduction in economic activity.
But, Congressman, on that, unemployment's at a 5-year low. Republicans say, at what point do we stop doing this?
Well, that's a good question. What I would point out is that 7%, it is a 5-year low, but 7% unemployment should not become the new norm in this country. I mean, that is unacceptable.
It never was a norm.
And if you also look behind the numbers at the long-term unemployed, these are people who are, again, still looking for work because that's a condition of getting unemployment compensation. That number did not go down in the last jobs report. So when you see the economic uptick, obviously that's good news overall. But when you look under the covers a little bit, these people are still hurting badly. So, and it's also, there are big regional differences. So just because the national number may be improving, or, for example, look, in the state of Maryland, unemployment is below the 7%. But there are still places in Maryland that have pockets of extra unemployment. And so it's really important that we address this issue before we go.
It's so callous to say, well, it's 7%, it's a 5-year low. Who cares about that?
I don't think you should pick an arbitrary number, but put it this way. As long as we have the figure where there are, I don't know exactly what it is, but 5 to 10 Americans looking for every job, then we need to make sure that we fix the jobs part before we say no more unemployment compensation.
And just quickly, just to less than a minute, Congressman, we got to point out that John Boehner and Paul Ryan are getting a lot of flack about this agreement from extremists on the right, the Koch brothers and Jim DeMint, have already said, no, we could never support this, and we're going to hold them accountable if they vote for it.
Well, that's right, and that's why I think it is important for others looking at the agreement, myself and others, to look at what the alternative is at this point, because the reason the Tea Party is so upset is they're in favor of full sequester. They're in favor of letting the law just take effect. Right now, if Congress doesn't do anything, come mid-January, the full sequester takes effect, and that would mean very deep cuts. It would mean continued furloughs in federal agencies into next year. And what this agreement does is provide additional funding to avoid those deep cuts, and that's why the Tea Party folks are very upset. I mean, and I can understand why the Tea Party folks are very upset, because we did and do increase spending now by $45 billion more than it would be if you go to sequester.
Yeah.
And that's not only good for the economy, but as I say, it's really important for vital services that are being provided in education and science and research, those kind of areas.
This is going to be a big day, an interesting debate, and interesting to vote, Bob, for all of us on the Hill. So, Congressman, your job is to go out and save those unemployment benefits, like you've been fighting to do.
Amen.
All right.
Outrageous that we'd go home without that.
Go for it with our full support. Thank you, Congressman.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Sheryl Kaskowitz, Fred Rotondaro, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to